Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bureau of Business Research webinar today, our April webinar, where we'll discuss Nebraska's producer services industry. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the director of the Bureau of Business Research here at UNL, and I'll be leading you through the webinar today, tell you about an industry I think is real important to the state and how it's been doing in recent years. A few features of the webinar I'd like to point out to you. To begin with, we have a chat room, so feel free to chat with the other audience members for the webinar. Won't bother me a bit if you see a name you know and you send a message back and forth while I'm talking. I'm used to that from class, so it's not a problem. The other thing is we have a question and answer window. So feel free to type in your question at any point. And I'll be answering the questions at the end of the webinar. So you can also just type them in at the end. But you can type them as we go if you would prefer to get on the top of the list for answering questions at the end. Well, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So first of all, I just want to review what are producer services. Then we'll talk about some of the characteristics of the industry that make it interesting. And then we'll see how Nebraska is doing. That's the plan for our webinar today. So what are producer services? Well, producer services are businesses that are primarily engaged in providing services to other businesses. So not selling them goods or parts or things they need in the manufacturing process, but selling services that they might need in the manufacturing process or for their office or so forth. So a good example would be accounting services. So a lot of the people employed in the accounting firms and the accounting industry are primarily engaged in providing accounting services to other businesses. That's what makes it a producer service. But of course, private individual families and households also have accountants, so it's not purely a producer service business, but that's a big part of what the accounting industry does. So let me give you some other examples of producer services, and let me confess, first of all, that I'm in this webinar, I'm tending to focus on the I guess higher wage producer services. So there's some producer services such as landscaping and so forth that landscaping businesses provide to business customers. I'm not going to focus on that so much, but more things like accounting. So let me show you the list. So here's what we're looking at. Things like engineering and architectural services, legal services. Those are two examples where a whole lot of the customers of those industries are other businesses, which is what makes them producer services. But of course, families and households also use those services as well. Information technology obviously is critically important and for business and growing. The need for information technology services is growing all the time. Many businesses need advertising. Well, they probably all do at some level, although it looks very different for some industries than others. Management consulting, how to operate your business better. That's an important business service. Specialized design services. For some businesses, privately hiring scientific research and development is a critical service. And really just providing some main examples here. There's many other producer services of this type. Now, it turns out these, and I'll provide some evidence for this in a minute, but it turns out these producer service businesses are rapidly growing, especially in terms of jobs. So employment growth is very rapid in this list, or at least many parts of this list of industries that I'm providing right here. Now, why is that happening? I think the most important way to understand it is think about the enormous pressure that businesses face to be efficient in our hyper-competitive economy. So competitors are always finding ways to better ways to compete. And I know it doesn't seem like it in this era of higher inflation, but ultimately to push down prices, maybe not right now, but that'll come sometime in the future again. So businesses are competing to push down prices. There's overseas competition. is putting downward pressure on prices. So it's a hyper-competitive environment, and the businesses need to save money. So one way to save money is to have these services outsourced and provided by other businesses, and less so with an in-house staff. Although there's usually some in-house staff to kind of work with the outside consultants. So a business or industry with that hires a lot of legal services might have some attorneys of their own to kind of monitor and work with the legal service providers, just to give an example. The other part of it is, I guess, knowledge-intensive activities are becoming a more important part of the production process anyway. So if you think about an office environment, more and more technology, chatbots, AI. It's technology that's producing things rather than workers. That's certainly true in a manufacturing plant as well. And so these producer services are a growing part of the production process as well. So for both reasons, these industries are growing very rapidly. And the businesses in these industries can have customers not just locally, not just within the same city, but all around the country, and in neighboring states and so forth. So it really is can be a basis for a local economy. Now, this is a little bit inside baseball, but within the coding system, where we put the various industries in the American economy into a coding system, many of the, if not all, of the producer service industries that I just mentioned are located in one industry code, Industry Code 54, which is called, wait for this, Professional, Scientific, and Technical Services. So that's a lot to say, but we'll be looking at data for Industry 54, Professional, Scientific, and Technical Services here over the next 10-15 minutes. And to save some time, I'm just going to refer to it as PSTS, for Professional, Scientific, and Technical Services. So let's start thinking about these industries a little bit more. And now we're into the characteristics of this producer services industry, PSTS industry, whatever you want to call it. The first thing to know about it, as you would probably guess when you saw the titles of some of these industries, is these industries employ many college graduates, often in STEM fields. So if you think about engineers, accountants, software development, those are STEM fields by and large, and certainly people need at least an undergraduate degree, often, in some cases, a graduate degree. Marketing specialists, management consultants. I don't have lawyers listed here, but of course lawyers need a post-college degree, a graduate degree. So these are very education-intensive industries. So if people are more educated, a lot of college degree holders, the next thing that occurs to you probably as well is probably pretty good paying jobs. And there is some evidence of that. So what I have here is the 2022 average weekly wages. So take these weekly wages and multiply them by 50, and you've got an idea of what the annual salaries we're talking about are here, or divide them by 40, and you can get an idea what the hourly salaries are that we're talking about here. But we're comparing the 2022 average weekly wages for all jobs, which we call all non-farm jobs, for the producer services jobs, the PSTS jobs, and for manufacturing jobs, which is another important industry in our economy. Unfortunately, we don't have all the 2023 data out yet, so I can't make that comparison, but I think it would look similar. And so what you see, the average job in the economy pays about $1,300 a week, so about $65,000 a year. But for PSTS jobs, it's 67% higher than that. So about more than $2,200 a week. So those are quite well-paying jobs. It's much higher than manufacturing. As you might expect, manufacturing is a little bit higher than the overall average, but only 14% higher. The professional services are substantially higher. So this is a source not just of jobs for college graduates, but for high-paying jobs. It's also a rapidly growing industry in terms of employment especially. So just to give you an example, let's look at the same three groups for and now look at job growth rather than wages. So we're going to look at the last decade, 2014 to 2023, across the whole country during those 10 years. All employment, which we call all non-farm jobs, grew by about 12% during that 10-year period. So about 1.1, 1.2% a year. Pretty good job growth during this period. But manufacturing did add jobs. So on net, manufacturing jobs did expand over the last decade, but about half as much as jobs overall, 6.2%. It's the PSTS jobs, producer services jobs, that were growing very rapidly. And you can see that they grew nearly 30% over this 10-year period. So annual growth approaching 3% per year, and more than twice as fast as employment overall. So to sum up, this industry, PSTS, creates a lot of jobs for college graduates, creates high-paying jobs, which I guess isn't surprising if it's a lot of college graduates. But what isn't necessarily true, but didn't have to be true, but is true, is it's also a rapidly growing industry, growing more than twice as fast as the average industry. Here's just another way to look at that, like what share of all jobs are in the PSTS industry. And you can see that it's gotten to be a pretty high share. 6% of employment back in 2014 is already up to nearly 7% of employment in 2023. As I showed you on a previous slide, manufacturing employment has grown in the last decade, but not quite as fast as jobs overall. And so you see that manufacturing's share of all employment is down to 8.3%. So the two things are converging. And I think this is fairly interesting. So we are very interested in how the manufacturing industry is doing when we think about the economy. We should be. It's a very important industry. And part of the reason people are interested in it at the state and local level is we know it can kind of be a basis for your economy. It creates higher paying jobs, and it creates jobs, or it's an industry where the customers are not just located locally, they're located throughout the country. And that's another thing that makes it a strong basis for a local or state economy. Same with agriculture, obviously. So the PSTS sector, you could make similar arguments. Again, there are local customers, but you can sell business services all over the multi-state region, all over the country, if you have a big enough firm, a firm with a long enough reach in terms of providing producer services. I think we all know examples of accounting firms and engineering firms here in Nebraska that have that kind of reach, law firms, so forth. I could go down the list. And so what we're seeing over time is PSTS is becoming almost as important. Producer services are becoming almost as important as it being a basis for the economy, at least across the nation, as manufacturing. And I leave you with the following question. Given the trend you see here, how long will it take until PSTS employment is a larger share of employment than manufacturing? When we look back at the data in 2023, will the two have converged? Another thing I'd say about the PSTS industry, producer services, is it's really critical for large urban economies. So you've probably heard stories, I have certainly, for decades about how cities like Chicago and Philadelphia have been losing manufacturing jobs, have had struggles of various kinds. But of course, when you visit these places, you see that remains a lot of prosperity there. I think PSTS might be a big part of the reason for that, is that as these cities have specialized less in manufacturing, they've specialized more in producer services. And we'll have some data about that in a minute. So this industry has been critical in helping some of our large cities stay at least relatively vibrant. And I think it's been a big part of the reason some of the boom towns that we know about are boom towns. So cities like Austin, Texas have been growing really rapidly, and including in this industry, especially in this industry. Raleigh, Durham, part of North Carolina, similar thing could be said. Even some of the, I guess, older cities that are really thriving, like Boston and San Francisco, they have a real specialization in this industry as well. So let me kind of just pull it all together. PSTS, producer services, is a high-wage, high-job growth sector of the economy. It can be a basis for a local economy. Indeed, it's been the key to urban success. And I think one of the reasons big cities or growing cities are able to attract and retain so many college graduates is because this industry is growing there as well. Okay, so how is Nebraska doing in the PSTS industry? So let's look at some data on that. First of all, here I've repeated that data you saw earlier about U.S. trends in terms of the share of jobs in the PSTS industry and the producer services industry. See, it's up from about 6% 10 years ago to nearly 7% in 2023. We've made some progress in Nebraska, up from 4.4% to 4.9%. So the industry's been growing faster than employment overall here in Nebraska as well, but we're behind. And as you can see, we're not really catching up either. We're falling a little bit further behind. We were 1.5% behind in terms of share back in 2014. Now we're up to 2% behind. So there's many great professional scientific and technical service firms in Nebraska. People are doing amazing things, lots going on, but it's also true that we're not quite keeping up. Let's look at the percent job growth. So we know Nebraska's, at least in sometimes during this 10-year period, was doing a little better than the nation. So maybe our overall growth in PSTS is just as good as the nation's, even if our share isn't doing as well. But actually, we don't match that national growth rate. So 16.7% growth rate over 10 years here in Nebraska. That's pretty good. That's a 1/6. For every 6 jobs, you got a 7th one over the last 10 years in the PSTS industry. So that's real progress. But again, it's lagging the national progress a bit. And I guess it's natural to look at Omaha. You'd expect it to be the center of our state's producer services industry, and it really is to a large degree. So here you again have repeated the United States shares in 2014, 23. I've got the Nebraska share up there again. But then we see how Omaha is doing in terms of share, and look at some other cities that would be natural to be interested in. Des Moines, kind of our competitor, or a city we kind of focus on or compare. I don't know if we compare Des Moines to Omaha, but it's out there, and one point of comparison. You can see Chicago, a big city in our region here in the Midwest, and then Austin, Texas, kind of a famous boomtown. What you see in Omaha is actually very little progress over the last decade. So the professional producer services industry did grow in Omaha, but roughly at the same rate as employment overall. Even Des Moines was able to do better than that. Their share was not up as fast as nationally, but pretty close, up at 0.7% over the decade. Chicago basically matched the national average in terms of the growth of the share of producer service employment. And you can see Chicago's about, I guess you'd say, 30 to 40% greater in terms of its share of employment in this industry. And then you look at a boomtown like Austin, the share is even greater than Omaha. The growth is enormous. Probably approaching 100,000 new jobs in this industry in Austin over the last decade or so. So again, Nebraska's not doing quite as well. Omaha's not doing quite as well. And that's a real lost opportunity. We have so many things we do well here in Nebraska, but this is an important industry, a real kind of the center of rapid, high-wage job growth in the economy. We're part of it, but we're not really keeping up. So a natural next question to ask is, what can be done about that? So, and I should have had a slide that said, I don't know. That should have been the next slide. But here's some ideas or potential things that could be looked at. So obviously, a lot of sort of upper middle class workers in this industry, a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs, accounting firms, law firms, IT firms. Some of them have been started by individuals, partnerships, so forth. So lowering tax rates on entrepreneurs and upper middle class workers might be one strategy to grow this industry in our state. We need to enhance math education to prepare people for this industry. Of course, a lot of great work being done on math education in K through 12 in Nebraska. All I'm saying is do even more, do even better with that. Encourage more students, whether it's at the high school level when they're ready or the college level, to study and succeed in STEM fields. I really emphasize succeed. There's a lot of great students that start out in STEM fields and end up not finishing because it can be so challenging. Common experience for students studying in the STEM fields in college is you have someone that was always a highly successful student, winds up in an engineering or computer science class and might be right at the average or even a little below average. It doesn't mean they couldn't do it, but that can be quite a shock for people. And so do we have the mentors we need, the help we need to help a larger share of those students make it through those programs and into STEM fields? I think that's a very important question for universities and people throughout the state. Be critical to grow in-state internship programs at these producer services firms. Again, a lot of firms are providing great opportunities, doing many things. So I want to give credit to everyone who's already very active in this. But could more be done to help this industry grow faster in the state? Could people outside the industry help these firms in some way to provide more internships, or the state could do that? And then enhance the quality of life. That's kind of always an idea, along with cutting taxes to help any industry grow, but maybe particularly with an eye to the quality of life things that college graduates, people who would wind up in STEM fields might find important. It's of course important to improve quality of life for Nebraskans of every interest. So that's what I have. I guess through maybe question and answer, what ideas do you have? I think there's a great need to figure out what the best approach could be here. So we'll see if there's any questions. If not, then I'll take it on myself to think about this some more and ask people and try to come back with a better list when we update you on how Nebraska's been doing in this important industry, probably about the same time next year in 2025. Well, I'll wait and see if there are any questions. Let me remind you how you can follow the Bureau of Business Research. So there's opportunities to do that through any of these social media sites. We also have a monthly, it comes out more than once a month typically, newsletter that you can receive via email. And all you have to do is send an email to that address right there, and you'll be added to the email list. This is our last webinar of this school year. So we'll be back in the fall with a new webinar series, and look forward to seeing all of you then.